Hello, Avatar fans, and welcome to the next episode of the Avatar Online podcast. This is going to be episode 266 of our regular shows, and we are recording this one on December 2nd, 2023. This is the official podcast for the fan site, AvatarTheLastAirbenderOnline.com, and I'm going to be your main host, Morgan, Airspeed Prime, and joining me on the podcast is Greg2B from the site.
What's up, everyone?
Excellent. So we have news to talk about, some of it pretty notable, of course, and then we will, after quite a bit of a break, we will be getting back to our episode reviews, continuing our rewatches for Avatar and Korra. Today we're going to be doing 205 Avatar Day for Avatar and K209, the guide for Korra. But yeah, we'll start with the news, and I think we have to start with the news that kind of basically happened last night, and that was Avatar Generations has shut down as of last night. So we've known this has been coming since last month. Basically, they announced this, and probably even longer than that, we had a sense that the game was coming to an end, but it did actually wrap up last night. Now, it's a bit of a weird thing here where, like, they said it would be ending December 2nd, and in certain regions that was the case, so it was a little bit of a surprise that it kind of happened probably like 12-ish hours, I think, before most people maybe expected it to. But the servers have shut down, the game is done, and so yeah, Avatar Generations is done. It didn't quite get to a full year of like public release, but if you include the kind of longish beta test period, it's like a year and like 2 months or so. So unfortunate, they had a lot of great plans in place to do extra content, but we won't get to see that. So that's the kind of big loss here, is that this source of pretty regular content is gone. But Greg, what are your thoughts on the end of our first Avatar mobile game?
Yeah, no, it's always kind of sad to see something die sort of prematurely like it did, and like you said, they definitely had a lot of plans with it going forward and stuff like that. And it's unfortunate that it doesn't seem like it's a direct fault of sort of the game's performance overall. It's just sort of a circumstances of events that sort of brought it down. And there's varying, huge different sort of opinions on it, and what people would have preferred and stuff like that. But it's still sad to see it go, and all the content that it had and that they were developing for it. So it's bittersweet to see it go.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, like there were big fans of this game. I know some people, the game just didn't do anything for them, but I think everyone did appreciate like the new art, and the Kyoshi update especially was a huge highlight for a lot of people. I played through it last night on stream during the final few hours as we went all the way through to the shutdown of the game, and it was cool to just kind of see kind of like the best the game had to offer, and the idea, oh yeah, we were probably like a couple of weeks away from getting the next section of that, and they would have went on to do it for Yang Chen and all these other eras, all the new characters they could have added in, and just the fact that none of the other materials or like the comics, Legends RPG, even Avatar Studios, we don't know what they're doing. We are definitely going to miss a kind of source of that little style of content that this game had to offer. So hopefully the other mobile game that's apparently coming early next year can do something similar. But there's a lot of stuff that's kind of lost in this. Thankfully, people out there are kind of archiving a lot of the stuff from the game. It was already done kind of like a bit ahead of time, and so that stuff is out there if you want to kind of find it, download it to have a lot of the cool art that's in the game. But Avatar Generations is over, and it's unfortunate just that like video games for Avatar this year was a kind of negative, one game shutting down and then the other game just not being very good. Hopefully things can improve. But from that, we'll go to something that was actually super well received, and that is the first teaser trailer for Netflix live action. This hit, I think, shortly after the last podcast that we did, so this is our first time talking about it on the podcast. But yeah, we got our teaser trailer at Netflix Geeked Week, and it's been incredibly popular. I think it's been one of Netflix's biggest kind of teaser trailers in terms of the amount of views it's gotten, the reception, all the reaction channels doing reactions to the trailer. Just it felt like for a little bit like, oh wow, Avatar is back. Like everyone is talking about this thing because it's the next big new Netflix project, and I think based on like the numbers, it did better in terms of view count than the One Piece live action teaser trailer. So um, they've they have something potentially good on their hands here. There's still a lot we have to see in that there's only one line of dialogue and it's Gyatso, not the main characters. We have to see a lot of stuff around the writing and the actual adaptation. But I think, at least for me, visually, I feel like I'm sold on the show, but I'm still a little bit skeptical about some of the other stuff. But I do expect it to be of a pretty decent quality, and I suspect I'm going to, at the very least, like and enjoy what we get here. But what were your thoughts on our first proper look at Netflix Avatar?
Yeah, no, I think I definitely can see the reason behind everyone's sort of hype for it and, overall sort of enthusiasm for what they were able to show off on the teaser trailer. It is a teaser, so there is, a good bit more they could actually show in terms of like the official stuff that's going to be there and whatnot. But I think, from what I've seen and what people have been sort of going over it, it definitely feels like it's, something from the Avatar world. It feels like it fits the show just sort of in the live action format that, they're going for in this choice for their production here. So I think, it definitely has a lot of people, a lot more, I think, positive on it than they were before. So I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, and the main details here are that they confirmed the release date as expected. I think in our last podcast we had the rumor that it was February 22nd.
Mm-hmm.
That turns out to be true. So it is actually coming relatively early in the year. We're really only a couple of weeks away from it kind of coming out. We're not too long away at all. So that's good. The start of the year for Avatar definitely needs something for next year. There's not a lot of other stuff that we know about for early next year. So February, I think that adds to the excitement that it's not too far away. But we'll end the discussion here with just what were some of your kind of standout moments from the trailer, from the kind of visuals that we actually did get to?
That's a good point. I mean, I think for me, I liked a lot of the sort of environments that they have. I think sort of the scenes that they have for those were actually pretty good. I think Aang was probably pretty good too. I think a lot of the characters that they have, they look, they feel like they're pretty on point. I mean, granted, a lot of the scenes they took from the trailer are, most of the like iconic moments from the show that we've seen, which is smart. Like, why wouldn't you do that? So I think the fact that they did that means that they have, pretty good confidence in what they're doing, and I think that's sort of reflected in everyone's sort of feedback of it overall. So no, I'm pretty happy with what they've shown so far. I'm still, waiting to see how it plays out overall with, interactions of characters and dialogue and stuff like that. But I think it definitely, it looks cool so far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, the probably the standout visual was probably just Omashu. I thought Omashu looked like really, really good, like way better than I ever expected. I thought that little pan up shot was very cool, seeing the gates and the kind of tiers of Omashu, the delivery system. Other than that, I suppose we probably have to mention the Air Nomad genocide kind of opening scene in the trailer. That looks like new content. That is something that was you see like a very basic visual in the show very early on about this and like stuff like that, but nothing in terms of like they seem to actually, based on like the actors they have and so on, they're actually going to show us at least a sequence of the Air Nomad genocide to kind of get that across. So that's going to be very interesting, and the fact that they led with that I thought was kind of interesting. But do you have any thoughts on that, actually seeing this event that we've speculated about for so long? We might be shown some of it.
No, they're definitely gonna highlight that if they're willing to sort of show that there. That's definitely gonna be a standout moment, especially since we know some things, but it's also very little, and even some of it's from like other sources of media. So I suspect that this will probably be like one of the big things when the show actually comes out that people will sort of latch onto, and you'll be referencing all the stuff that people have never heard of because they're not as deep into the things as that. So that'll definitely be something to see when it comes out fully.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm interested to see how it all works, because the one thing I'm almost dreading with the release is that, like, oh, it's a Netflix show. it's all coming out at once, like just trying to like cover it all. And with Netflix shows,
Hmm.
it's always that rush to like, I just have to absolutely like eat this content, so I'm not like spoiled by people if I like take a break or anything like that. So you just have to kind of rush through it and then hope that there's discussions to still be had. Um, this is where like obviously we hope with like Avatar Studios, when they get around to doing like series, that they do release the episodes weekly to allow for the discussion to actually happen. Um, but we'll see what exactly happens there. Next piece of news, also very big. We did get the release of the Avatar Book 1 soundtrack. So the remastered version has released digitally in all the platforms, as well as releasing on vinyl. So we've had at this point like 2-ish weeks with it, and everyone in general has, I think, been very impressed with it. It's probably one of the main merchandise kind of standouts of the year. This is something we've been waiting for so long, and we finally actually have it here. So, what were your thoughts on it? Have you listened to the whole thing? How have you been enjoying the soundtrack, really?
Yeah, no, I definitely have listened to the whole thing a couple times at this point. I got it on Amazon MP3 so that I could actually, have some actual form of it. So yeah, no, so far it's been pretty good. It definitely feels like they remastered it and everything like that. It definitely has more of the professional orchestral sort of like feel to it compared to some of like what we have that's been like ripped from the show and stuff like that. So there definitely is a difference from what we've had before, which was of course unofficial anyway. So there's definitely sort of those sort of comparisons there, but I think it's really cool that they finally got it out there and they're putting it out there, and that this is going to hopefully be the beginning of the rest of the books as well.
hmm Yeah, I definitely have enjoyed it as well. I've listened to it a few times myself. Some of my main kind of notes here are that like it's kind of surprising that like there are certain tracks and pieces of even notable tracks that I don't really immediately recognize, and that like I need to do like a rewatch like alongside listening to the soundtrack to fully pick everything out. So it's kind of so interesting that like say like the jet track, and
Mm.
it's like, what's this first minute here? But then the main kind of energetic kind of piece of the music comes in, and you're like, oh yeah, that's Jet's theme, but like I did not remember that first minute. And there's little bits and pieces that are like, oh, that's here, and like and so on. And that like the penguin sledding music is actually the Omashu delivery chute music, and it's more named after that than the penguin sledding scene and bits and pieces like that. I think a lot of people had that because, like you said, we mostly have experienced the soundtrack through like YouTube playlists, which are compiled from a couple of tracks which Jeremy Zuckerman put up on I think his MySpace page like years ago. So we actually have like the original versions of some tracks, but then yeah, some of it is just edited out of the show. A lot of it's edited from like the old Nickelodeon website as well. So there's some tracks that are just like, why is this one here? And then other ones where it's like, what is this one? So it's just crazy to get 35 tracks from book one, whereas for the most part the playlists out there are like 35 for the whole series overall. So what was your reaction with regards to that in terms of like, did you recognize every track, or did you have the same experience as me where there was bits and pieces you didn't quite get?
Yeah, I think it depends on the song because I don't know, most of them I feel like I recognize them, but a lot of them, like you said, they're either extended in either the beginning or the end of them. And when you're watching it with the show, you're focusing on more than just the music, unless it's like your umpteenth time, rewatching or whatever. Then maybe you might pay attention more to the music. But like your sort of like initial run through, you don't really catch everything. So it definitely feels like some of these are extended parts, and it's also just the way that they remastered these as well. Like it's not, they, I don't know, they feel like they have, more done to them with, how they re-recorded them using
Mm.
either the original instruments or, a new ways of doing their technique, since we know they don't have, exactly everything that they had before, or the fact that they have more now than they had before, which is cool to see as well. So there's definitely, bits and pieces where it definitely takes you a second for it to kick in, or you like remember the first half and I don't remember any of the second half of them. So it's cool to see how it plays in sort of like a longer format. Because like when you're in the show, like the chances that you're going to get a full like 6 minute play out of an actual song
Mm.
is usually not likely. Or if you do, it'll be lowered so low that it doesn't overpower the dialogue or anything like that. So there's definitely that to keep in mind when you're listening to this and thinking back towards the show.
It does make me immediately want like a book two. When's book two coming out? And we don't really have news on
Mm-hmm.
that beyond like the early announcement stuff, which was they answered questions that was like pretty positive about the other stuff actually happening. I think Avatar in Concert, the fact that it is all three books, I think also highlights that. I'm guessing that is remastered as well, because it'd be a bit weird if they just did the book one stuff is remastered, but the book two and three stuff isn't. So, do you have any thoughts on that? What do you think is going to be the way they do the rollout for future books of the soundtrack?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I don't know. I mean, when you keep in mind like what you're saying that they do have them in some form or fashion for some of the songs, at least for the concert, like the concert is the whole the whole show, right? So it's not going to be like just it's going to be a subset. So maybe they have like half of book two done for the ones that are in concert, and the same thing for book three, stuff like that, but they don't have the whole thing. So I don't know. I mean, I could see it definitely coming out, I don't know, maybe middle of next year, maybe, depending on how things go with everything else that's being produced and stuff like that. So I don't know. I could see it coming out, sooner rather than later, hopefully.
Hmm. And then our last piece of news is some delays for notable books for next year. So the June and Iroh comic, The Bounty Hunter and the T-Birr, has been delayed from I think May 14th to June 4th. So not quite a full month, but it has been pushed into a new month. This is obviously disappointing, just because one other minor piece of news is just that there's no free comic book day book for Avatar or Korra for next year. So like no books in like the first like 5 months of the year basically is sort of the basic idea, apart from the more minor kind of stuff that's not super important. So yeah, that's been delayed, and you kind of wonder like, oh, is this going to start a trend of even more delays for the comics? We're not really sure. And then the other thing that I think surprised a lot of people is that the novel, The Reckoning of Roku, was also delayed. So it was delayed from July to August 20th. So this one was just over a month's worth of delay, and it will be the first novel to not come out in July. So that was a bit frustrating, because they did the early announcement on the novel for the first time, and then before we even have the cover, it's already been pushed back by a month. It's a bit like, oh no, are the delays beginning to affect the novels now when they hadn't before? Um, this all does seem to just be the kind of shipping logistics of the physical copy stuff, rather than the book won't be done on time type situation. So hopefully they've locked them in accurately at this point, but yeah, it's just the hope that they don't continue to slip beyond this. But any thoughts on these two books being delayed?
Yeah, that's I don't know. It's always a bit sad when you sort of hear delays, and if the projects are actually done and it's just sort of the procurement of resources in order to actually get them out, and that it feels a bit bad when it happens. But that's I know that's a bit sort of out of the controls. At least the stories themselves are at least content wise on sort of track on their actual schedule. So it is a bit of a bummer, especially since there's not so much in terms of that stuff in the beginning of the year. But I don't know, maybe it'll all work out depending on how stuff goes with the show.
Hmm. Um, and yeah, that is the news. I don't really know how much news we're expecting for the rest of the year. I'm assuming there'll be at least some small bits about Netflix Avatar. There's maybe a chance the full trailer hits this month, but I think most are saying that with Netflix shows, the main trailer comes out the month beforehand to kind of hype it up. Um, Avatar Studios, we just have no real idea. Oh, actually, I completely forgot about this. One interesting piece of news that kind of slipped out, because it's kind of weird, the source on this. It's not like an officially announced thing, but we apparently do have the voice actress for Katara in the
Oh
2025
yeah.
animated movie. So apparently it's going to be Jessica Matten, And the source for this is that she's the CEO of this company called Seven Forward Entertainment. And they have just, I guess, recently upgraded their website, so it's kind of under construction. And they have a new kind of like About Us page. And in that, on the section about Jessica Matten, it mentions, after like other projects she's been in, it mentions like, comma, the voice of Katara in Avatar The Last Airbender's new feature film for Paramount Studios in 2025. So she's technically, I suppose, revealed this herself in a company that she's the CEO of, the website for it. I don't see any reason that to like doubt it super heavily or anything like that, but it's weird that all of the information about Avatar Studios is always leaked or comes out in some weird way, and it's never like directly like super official. But cool that we have a voice actor. Obviously it is not Mae Whitman, so the rumors that they were going to recast basically everyone, I think except Dante Bosco, are coming true. This was ultimately to be expected, and it makes sense to a certain degree because it's going to be Katara in her 20s basically, and that's I guess a different voice than teenage Katara. I get it if they felt like this is the way to make the role work as an adult for the character. But what are your thoughts on this news, a voice actor announcement?
Yeah, I mean it's cool. I mean I don't know, it's just funny, like you said, how that stuff sort of just comes out, and the fact that people are, so invested in it that, we're so invested in it that, we're able to figure it out that way, because that's pretty, it seems like that's not something you would normally be able to figure out. But yeah, it's cool. I'm interested to see how she sounds. And yeah, I mean, we pretty much, like you said, knew they were going to recast just because of the ages and everything. And some of the characters they have already casted from before when they were in Korra. So it'll be interesting to see, if they keep any of those, if they don't, and how that all works out.
Mm-hmm. So, I don't know, maybe this is a slight hope that, like, if she maybe got the go-ahead at some point in the future to add this to her website, maybe it suggests an official announcement about at least the main cast is coming soon, because they have to say something sooner rather than later, because like this is a movie that needs a title, so we have to stop saying stuff like Avatar The Last Airbender's new feature film from Paramount Studios. And then that's even slightly complicated because, like, what about Avatar Studios? Does that get mentioned in there? And it's just kind of complicated. Interestingly, like, IMDb has put the name of this voice actor up, and they still have that Echoes and Aftershocks kind of title. That was the first rumored one. Still don't know if that's going to be official or not, but I'm assuming, for sure next year we're going to get this announcement with the first wave of information. It's just how long are they going to keep us waiting for it is the real question. But yeah, we'll move on from the news and go into our reviews. So we'll start with our Avatar episode for this podcast, and that is 205 Avatar Day. So this is a super interesting episode to go back to, especially in a post-Kyoshi novel world, because this is the episode where you kind of learn the most about Kyoshi to a certain degree. This is the whole Chin the Conqueror incident. But it's also, I think, one of the funniest episodes. It kind of coincides with like basically like episode 5 of all of the seasons are like pretty funny episodes, but they also have a more serious kind of like bit to them as well. And that kind of continues this trend. I've always really, really liked this episode because it blends the kind of fun, to a certain degree, almost like fillery aspect of like in a way most of the episode, but then you get the super important lore drop of here's all this kind of Kyoshi information. We return to Kyoshi Island, the rough rhinos are in here, and the Zuko stuff is kind of important, even if it's a very small part of the episode. So I always remember this episode pretty fondly. I get maybe why maybe it's hard to super highly rate this episode, super high up on like your list of episodes, but it's always been an episode I have a lot of time for. But what are your general thoughts on Avatar Day?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think if it didn't have that sort of balance with sort of the history and the lore, in addition to all of the other sort of stuff, this definitely would be pretty much automatically dismissed as sort of like a filler episode because it doesn't, in the grand scheme of things, without that, it's just like a cool sort of like side action bit with characters that are, somewhat reoccurring, but in the grand scheme of things, the Rough Rhinos don't really have, that much bearing on things. But with the combination there, it makes it a fun, entertaining episode, and you get to learn a little bit more about the world.
Hmm. So we'll start with the Zuko side of the episode because it is relatively small, but it is important. So we get a few scenes of Zuko as the Blue Spirit. He steals initially food and brings it back to Iroh. Then he steals like a pretty large amount of money from like an Earth Kingdom noble and uses that to buy like fancy like teapots and stuff like that for Iroh. And Iroh the whole time is kind of like, oh, I guess we need some of this stuff, but he is concerned that he kind of knows Zuko is stealing it all. But then the whole idea that like you haven't just bought like the basics, you've bought fancy stuff as if you're still royalty, and we get the whole there's a simple honor in poverty line, and that whole idea of like Zuko, even though they've been banished effectively from the royal family, they're not royalty anymore. He still feels like he should be, and he's still super holding on to that idea that if he just captures Aang and brings him back to Ozai, this will solve all of his problems. And Iroh's trying to tell Zuko that in the situation that we're currently in, I'm not sure that would solve everything. Slightly beginning to hint at the whole idea of, will kind of in a way getting what you want actually be the solution to the true problems you have, like with the family and stuff like that. Zuko feels this is like, oh, so I have no hope then if that's not going to work. But Iroh tells him that like hope is something that you give yourself, and that's the meaning of inner strength. But Zuko takes this as, oh, that means I need to travel on my own without you to give myself hope and find my own way. But Iroh does let him go, which is kind of interesting. He gives him the ostrich horse, and this starts our Zuko alone kind of plot thread here. So what are your thoughts on the Zuko section of this episode?
Yeah, I think this is, pretty pivotal for his character in terms of, understanding or beginning to understand what it means to sort of be on your own and how to sort of like navigate in sort of the, quote unquote real world. Because like you said, he is sort of holding on to the idea of, his past and what that could mean for his, hopefully better future, but he's, he doesn't really sort of understand that yet. He still, is lingering on those sort of, ideas that he's been given in the past of actual having hope for his, his future and what he, at least what he thinks he wants to achieve, right? Because he wants to capture the Avatar. He wants to be back in his father's good graces and, things to go back to the way that they were. But, Iroh seems to, as wise as his character always is, has already sort of realized that things are going to change, maybe for the better, maybe for the worse. But Iroh, it's interesting considering he's he's been up high in the nation and everything as well, but he has a broader understanding, as we always see with his character, that he's trying to impart on Zuko, which Zuko's trying to get it, but he's not quite there yet.
Yeah, like that point with Iroh is good because, like, yes, like he also is part of the royal family, but he can adapt to the situation they're in kind of so well, and you kind of wonder why is that? Like, we obviously know all these different parts of his life, and so he at this point like is worthy by the dragons and has met all these kind of important people. He's part of the Order of the White Lotus, so in a way, like, because he already has that kind of Four Nations lesson himself, he understands more about kind of the rest of the world, and that they're, royalty is just a small part of kind of his life, and who his whole point about like the tea as well, that like, oh, even though I'm a tea connoisseur basically, I don't need it to be served in the fancy stuff. It tastes the same even if it's from the most basic cup, and that's the whole thing with Iroh, is that like the tea is more important than what it's actually served in, and that's an important lesson for Zuko as well. But yeah, that brings us then into what most of the episode is about, which is the team's arrival into Chin Village and the whole idea of them holding Avatar Day. Now, there is a setup for this, which is that the rough rhinos attack at the start of the episode, and we get the setup for like Sokka's plot here, which is that as they escape, everyone grabs their stuff except Sokka, so Sokka is left without his special item, his boomerang, and he doesn't have an identity because of this, and sets up that whole idea of him having the props over the course of the episode. But yes, they arrive in Chin Village, and they're holding Avatar Day. It seems to be a celebration for the Avatar, but it's actually basically celebrating disliking the Avatar, because the town dislikes the Avatar. They hate the Avatar because in the past, Avatar Kyoshi killed their old leader, Chin the Great. So that is the early setup here is, wait, is that correct? A past Avatar just killed someone, the great leader of this town? And it's early enough in the episode that you don't like super question the village as being like idiots, but that changes later on. But what are your thoughts on the opening kind of segment of this episode?
Yeah, no, I think this is, I don't know, it's a nice sort of action bit with like, all the fun comedic stuff that Avatar is really known for doing pretty well, with them having to sort of go back and forth for the items, and Sokka sort of being left out as, sort of the classic, punching bag of the group in terms of, a lot of the different jokes. Although he does, prove his worth by sort of the end of the episode, even if it's, in conjunction with his sister as well. So I think it's a good bit to sort of start the episode off with.
Mm-hmm. And one thing I definitely noticed this time through was just kind of like, does it make sense for like the visuals of like Aang as the Avatar, the fact that they know what he looks like to make a giant float of him? Like, does it make sense that that has come across and they know super accurately about that? Like, we're still somewhat early in the series. It's kind of one of those things where I'm like, okay, I can accept it. I don't mind too badly. I guess they're a wanted post. How do you know for sure that this is what Aang looks like? But still, impressive. And it links up with some of the novel stuff about what Qinchao Village, basically what Chin Village was in the past, about the whole idea that, like, yeah, this place has always been known for having, like, very weird and odd customs, and it's continued to this day, even now being more Chin Village and focused on what it's actually about. So then we set up the whole idea of the plot of this episode is that Aang needs to clear his name. He doesn't believe a past Avatar could do this, and so he wants to clear basically the name of Kyoshi as well as himself. But he has to stand trial, and to do this he has to follow all of the customs of Chin Village, and we begin to see that, yeah, they do have very weird, out there kind of customs, including that obviously he has to remain in prison this whole time. They don't accept Water Tribe money, so he can't pay bail to get out, and this separates Aang from Sokka and Katara, meaning that they have to do the investigation while Aang has some fun interactions with the other prisoners, which I suppose we'll talk about that really briefly. It's mostly a comedy thing here, but it actually fits with the episode, the whole idea of these really tough-looking prisoners with tattoos. But you realize that, oh wait, just because they're in prison, it doesn't mean anything because it's Chin prison, and they seem to just imprison people for like almost anything because of the way their justice system works, just us. So yeah, it makes sense that these tough looking people are actually just really nice people helping out Aang, giving him advice on all these sort of things, and Aang actually ends up having a good time with the prisoners. So what are your thoughts on Aang's time in prison and the early view on the Chin Village justice system?
Yeah, I mean, I think that bit would work even if the village wasn't so ridiculous in their sort of justice system, or at least from our point of view, their justice system, just because, those sort of funny bits sort of always seem to work with Aang and his character, just because he's such a fun and sort of outgoing sort of character that he seems to make friends even in sort of like the worst of places. Like there's very few people that Aang can't sort of win over with his sort of personality. So I feel like that would have worked anyway, but it definitely goes against your sort of expectations in terms of being in a prison and being rough and tough sort of system. So they probably are in there for something very sort of like misdemeanor-ish compared to what might happen in any other sort of village or anything like that. So no, I like that whole sort of bit, and Aang having his sort of like therapy session, sort of early sort of one-sided shipping sort of understanding here. I think it definitely works for his character and it sort of gets that sort of idea of him and Katara as a couple, laid out there earlier on. So I think it works pretty well for getting that there. And yeah, you definitely get the vibe that this Chin village is sort of out there and maybe has, something that's different compared to what you would consider in most other sort of villages. Even when you see some of the interactions with some of the other people in the town, it definitely feels like there's something peculiar about them.
Hmm. It's around this time we do get the setup for like, okay, Sokka without his boomerang is going to be a master detective for this episode, and I like how that comes about and that Sokka's really worried. How are we going to do this investigation? How does this all work? And Katara and Aang together are like, something made me think that you were a master detective, Sokka. I don't know why. And he leans into it, and the props begin to come out. And I think it's a really fun kind of gag thing throughout the episode as he just kind of keeps adding props onto it. He's basically meant to be this kind of Sherlock Holmes-esque character. It positions Katara as the Watson, and I think it's a very fun dynamic throughout the episode that they don't overuse because it's actually like cool that we actually get to do this investigation, go into Kyoshi Island and all this stuff, and they do still get the investigation stuff across while still doing the jokes. So I definitely like how they do it. But what are your thoughts on Sokka and all the props that he has?
Yeah, no, his props are great, sort of addition to the episode, and it's sort of it just fits his sort of character. I mean, he loses something in the beginning, and he has to sort of gain items back and back, and he sort of gains more confidence as the episode sort of goes on, and he sort of figures out the case with Katara, and they have the whole like you mentioned, the whole back and forth, and how she's pretty much just as able to figure things out as he is able to, but he has to be the one to say because he's thinking he's the main detective here until he pushes a little bit too far, which is where you get sort of their sort of sibling sort of rivalry, sort of more shown in the forefront compared to say your typical sort of like Sherlock Holmes sort of detective system there. But no, I thought that was a really good sort of bit here, and how it eventually does work out, and he becomes back to his original props by the end of things.
Hmm. Yeah, and the dynamic between the two that we get is basically that Sokka is actually a good detective. I think that is the takeaway from the episode. But because he wants to be so theatrical and do basically the Sherlock Holmes, I will explain my deduction thing, and he takes so long to do it, Katara at that point catches on to like, oh, I see where you're going. I'll lay it out really quickly just to get on with things. And that's the kind of dynamic over the course of this of Katara just wants to get on with it and Sokka wants to make a show of it. And it's a fun dynamic. But yeah, we get into some of the details at this point. We do the investigation on the Chin side of things here first, and we get some details. They actually accurately present some years here. So this is the point at which they have to be like, okay, we made the mistake earlier on. Yes, Kyoshi's very old. 370 years ago, even though it's only like 2 avatars ago, even factoring in the 100 years. 370 years ago at sunset, apparently, Kyoshi killed Chin after walking out of this shrine. They have a footprint there on the edge of the cliff. And then afterwards, after Chin died, they built a statue. So the immediate investigation that we get here is that the temple and the statue are made out of the same stone. So they were obviously built like right next to each other at roughly the same time. So the mayor's story about what happened doesn't really make any sense because Kyoshi apparently walked out of a temple made out of the same stone, and then later a statue is made. That doesn't really fit overall. So there's the first kind of hole in the story, and the whole idea of like, oh yeah, the town doesn't really know its own history exactly. And this is the same with Kyoshi Island, the idea that they also don't seem to know their own history, which is the kind of weird part of this, that like, wait, do modern day people on Kyoshi Island not know it used to be attached? Why does that information not come up at any point? But I guess it's long enough ago that it sort of makes sense, especially with how kind of isolationist Kyoshi Island is. But yeah, what are your thoughts on the first part of this deduction? Because they actually have to try and come up with a whole idea of, oh yeah, Sokka and Katara basically have evidence to get Aang off on this, but then the reveal has to make it truthful in the end.
Yeah, I mean, the way that they go about it from the beginning, it feels like they're logically proceeding towards, at least the current evidence that they have, especially, on sort of the chin side of things with the sort of statue and the marble and the sort of footprint and sort of trying to sort of grasp how, this idea actually sort of works in terms of long times. I mean, it's also, a bit surprising that they're, able to find evidence since it, in theory, it has been such a long time ago, right? So they're able to sort of piece this together piece by piece, and I don't know. I like that. At least it feels like within the universe that has some sort of logic to it, even if it kind of seems kind of out there. I think a little bit.
So then we get the trip to Kyoshi Island. So Katara and Saga head on Appa to Kyoshi Island to get information on Kyoshi to kind of investigate things from her point of view. So when we arrive on the island, we immediately get the disappointment from the villagers. They want to see Aang because he was the fan favorite there. They have to reveal he's not here. So you get the Coco moment, you get Foamy Mouth Guy moment. But basically Oyaji kind of steps up here as like he's the historian, I guess, as the leader of the village. And he leads them to the shrine of Kyoshi. At this point, we get the reveal on like, hey, where's Suki? Sokka wants to know where Suki is, of course, and we get the very interesting reveal that she and the other Kyoshi warriors have left to fight in the war, and this happened because Suki was inspired by basically her meeting with the group. That inspired her to go out, and the others followed her. This is where, like, if you read Suki alone, the comic, you actually get more context for this moment in particular, because Suki's story is only kind of half told in the show, and the comic actually adds in some nice kind of pieces along the way. But cool that they reference this, coming back here and acknowledge this. And you have to assume at this point they knew they were bringing Suki back properly later on in the season. This is a nice setup for it. So before we get to the second part of the investigation, just what are your thoughts on this early section with the return to Kyoshi Island?
Yeah, getting back to the island, I think, is pretty cool, just because we haven't sort of, it's cool to see where, an island that we've been to before, sort of what the people are sort of, how they sort of feel after, sort of the previous events, which is something we don't always get to see in the show. Like, it happens a couple of times, but I think this is cool. You actually get to see the people and interact with them a little bit, even though, of course, they're all out there sort of looking for Aang, but, to get to see the current, I guess, sort of feeling of the town and how, they're appreciative of them come back, even if, Aang isn't necessarily there. But, I think it works out. They're able to sort of, get what they need from this.
Mm-hmm. Then they are shown the Kyoshi relics, basically. So we see her kimono, her fans, her boots, and the famous headdress as well. So we find out an interesting fact here. Kyoshi had the biggest feet of any avatar. So this is another evidence to help support the claim that Kyoshi might be innocent, which is that the footprint was relatively small that they saw, and Kyoshi's actual kind of boots are huge. So the mayor said that footprint was of the killer, Kyoshi, but it's clearly not. So there's one thing there. This scene is quite interesting to just reflect back on, because obviously we now know the sort of significance of the fans, the significance of the headdress with like Kyoshi's mother, but they go down in history as being the trademark items of like an avatar. That's kind of just cool to overall get. But the main thing that we get here is also we get this kind of mural that they have in the shrine, because on the island today is Kyoshi Day. So it's Avatar Day on Chin, Kyoshi Day on Kyoshi Island. The mural depicts a ritual happening also at sunset, which was when the killing apparently happened. So this is another contradiction, which is basically, how could Kyoshi be on the island performing this ritual at the same time as she was killing someone in a completely different location? So there's three key pieces of evidence here that basically together mean Kyoshi couldn't possibly have actually done this. So like I said earlier, I think they actually do a pretty good job at making you feel like, oh yeah, this is really well investigated. They have basically proven Aang innocent in all of this, and it's clever the way it's all done. But what are your thoughts on the investigation work on Kyoshi Island?
Yeah, no, the circumstantial sort of evidence that they have here definitely feels like, at least within this universe, and it's not that huge of a, it's not that many different things, but assuming that all of these sort of relics and the mural are accurately depicted, it definitely seems to sort of make sense, in terms of figuring out the shadows and the shoe size and sort of the general idea of what sort of happened in the past. That this could be true now. Would people at the village actually believe that this sort of mural sort of exists and is showing this correct depiction? That's another thing to be sort of considered here. But at least as far as Katara and Sokka have figured out, that this feels like pretty sort of damning evidence that this couldn't have happened the way that they thought it happened.
Yeah, it does highlight that, like, the evidence on like both sides, even on Chin Village, is like, yeah, it's just trusting that you remember what these things are correctly. Like this random footprint, we know it was related to what happened, and like it's not like protected or anything. It's just right there, and that they know the exact like history of when this statue was made exactly all these years later. No one really has like super clear information until, as we see, one of the actual participants actually speaks, as we'll see in just a few minutes. So yeah, they go back to Chin and they're like, hey, we have evidence, we'd like to present it, we think we really have a case here. And this is when Mayor Tong is like, oh, sorry, you don't realize how it works here. We have our just us system, which is basically, you say what happened, then I say what happened, and then I choose who's correct. So it's like, oh, you're obviously not going to ever go against what you yourself say, so justice won't actually be happen here. So all that matters is what the village thinks, so they know Aang is walking into this and is probably not going to come out of this. And we see them, they attempt to give Aang all the evidence, but because he wasn't there, he really struggles to present all of this like coherently, and he's just like sunset, footprints, stone, this matches this, and they're all like, what? And so they're just convinced that Aang is dead here. So just funny stuff the whole time through, as like some of the big reveals kind of come out here. But what are your thoughts on the reveal of the Just Us system and Aang's evidence?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this is definitely the part where you're like, okay, this village, this town definitely, has something going on with it that's not, right by, at least, by their standards here. I mean, just their shocked faces when they figure this out, is kind of funny. That definitely adds to the comedic bit of the episode. And yeah, I mean, I guess it's not too surprising that Aang, isn't necessarily like the greatest, at least not right now, with sort of like the facts and the figures of things. Although, I don't know. I wonder how they went over it with him. Like I feel like they could have done a better job of like prepping him for this or something like that. But I don't know. It works either way. Aang would probably try to make fun of it anyway, just because I don't know. He's still sort of in that phase where things are serious and things aren't serious at the same time. So it sort of works in that sort of regard here. But yeah, it definitely feels like there's no way that Aang's going to get out of this, in sort of the best sort of circumstances here. No one is sort of on his side in terms of the way that he's going about things.
Mm-hmm. So then the last ditch attempt from Katara here is, let's dress Aang up in all of the Kyoshi relics and hope something happens. That's basically it. It will spark something. I guess she knows roughly some of the stuff that's happened before, like the Roku situation back in book 1. Maybe it'll happen. And yeah, it seems silly until it actually works. After, hey everybody, Kyoshi here. Kyoshi actually does appear, but she admits that she killed Jin the Conqueror, but gives important context that he wasn't Jin the Great, he was Jin the Conqueror, and he was a tyrant, not a great leader. He tried to take over the entire Earth Kingdom, and based on the visual that we get here of the map, he took over the entire Earth Kingdom except Ba Sing Se and Yokoya, basically Kyoshi Island while it was still attached, and that's what happens here. He then went after Yokoya, and this is where Kyoshi chose to stop him to protect her home. So yeah, she basically just stands her ground at the entrance to her village, and she decides to separate it from the mainland. So this is when the peninsula becomes an island, and this is the creation of Kyoshi Island. Is Kyoshi using the Avatar state to create the island? And then what happens with Chin is that Kyoshi doesn't like directly kill him. He stays on the edge of the cliff while a lot of earthbending stuff has just happened, and he falls off the unstable cliff to his death. And the idea here is that, like, yes, I technically caused it, and then later on, of course, she'll clarify to Aang in book 3 that, yeah, but I was willing to do it anyway, even if it didn't happen sort of more accidentally, that this was justice in this situation. So this is the kind of big lore section of the episode, actual proper information about Kyoshi and also Chin. What are your thoughts on this? Actually getting kind of like, this is basically like the first time properly learning about stuff previous avatars have done.
Yeah, I don't know. I remember it always being pretty cool when you actually got to see this, especially like the first time. Just the idea that you get to see, an avatar from the past sort of, speak their mind. I think, there's probably like, tons of ways that you could say that this shouldn't work the way that it should work. But, the fact that they were willing to show it and to have, the character have, voice and everything, I think it's, it adds to sort of the impact and the energy of the moment here. I don't think it's something that you necessarily would think work, and just like you said, like they sort of play it up that it's not going to work in the beginning, right? And then it actually does work, and you get to sort of hear the reaction, get to see the map and how the whole sort of flashback of this sort of scene here. I think that's always pretty cool when you actually get to have sort of a flashback scene and see how things, firsthand sort of happened here. Of course, none of the people there get to see those visuals. That's just for us at home. But, the idea that, Aang was able to explain this through the voice of the actual avatar that, interacted with Chin the Conqueror or Chin the Great, depending on your point of view. It's definitely really cool to get to see, even if it doesn't exactly help his court case here.
Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, in terms of the investigation, this explains, like, basically all of the inconsistencies in that, like, some of it is just you misremembered when stuff was made, but the footprint was Chin on the other side of the divide of the island, basically, so they got that wrong, but this explains, like, why it was in that position. This explains how these 2 days in separate villages actually occur at the same time, because they were the same piece of land up until this exact moment and so on. So cool the way all that stuff comes together. But there's an interesting discussion, I think, about this, because the whole Chin the Conqueror thing is very interesting in terms of, I think, a discussion that the fandom has a lot of the times about Roku. Roku gets heavily criticized for not, like, killing Sozin after Sozin made, like, the first couple of colonies. It was like, wait, if he was an active avatar, how could he possibly miss, like, his friend, like, taking over a couple of towns in the Earth Kingdom? But then you have, like, this incident, and there's a lot of questions that come up from the idea of, like, wait, if Kyoshi's an active avatar, why does she wait to challenge Chin until he's taken over, like, 90% of the Earth Kingdom? Maybe 85, because Ba Sing Se is pretty big. That's the question that I don't think comes up as much, because I think there's a big difference between the first few colonies happening quite suddenly and an entire potential campaign to take over everywhere, and that would include, like, Omashu, like a huge important city like Omashu, and she only challenges him when he comes for her home. Like, why has this happened and stuff like this? And there's always been some interesting stuff to kind of delve into this with regards to some of the other lore that we have about the Earth King at the time as the 46th Earth King, who is known until a later incident in Kyoshi's life for not really caring about the people. So is this related to that and the whole idea that we know Kyoshi doesn't like the world leaders? She's very much for the people. And you almost get the idea of, like, was Chin effectively chosen by the people? This is why the people of his town think he was great, that people would prefer to have Chin over the 46th Earth King as the overall leader, and Kyoshi just sort of let this happen because it was the will of the people. But still, it's a question that I think probably needs to be asked more than anything to Kiyoshi is like, why did you let it get this way overall? But what are your thoughts on the details of this incident? Given like we know so much more about Kiyoshi now, what's your thoughts on the specifics of the Chin the Conqueror incident?
Yeah, no, there definitely is more that could be sort of explained and delved into that we really have, sort of definitive sort of answers for, because it definitely feels like, you would think that there's like a progression towards these sort of events, right? Like he didn't just get sort of like almost a whole sort of island and then just come to this one point. Like, you would think that there would have been some sort of intelligence, even if she's not sort of like the spy master that we know Yang Chen is. Like, we do know that she is, she does have, some people, and she does have, ways of finding things out. And, when she does have to deal with things, she generally deals with them head on, as we've seen from the books and even from this incident here. So it definitely feels like, maybe there was something else going on. Like, was she being distracted or led a different way? Or was she just so, apathetic to things, or the fact that it seemed like, people were okay with this to some degree? Like, maybe there's something along those lines in terms of, the conquering, which doesn't feel like it should be, since we've kind of seen how something similar to this has happened during Korra's time, right? So there's definitely a lot that goes with this sort of engagement, especially at this sort of scale here, especially the forces, at least from what we can see in this here, the forces that came to sort of, confront her directly. So it definitely feels like there's more to this story than anyone probably alive really understands, right? Like, I don't know, maybe there's some sort of historical record that could be found that would go into more sort of detail here, but there's definitely more to it, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because this is where you bring in like the Kyoshi novel information, and like what is the defining aspect of Kyoshi's era from the novels. It's that Dao Fei, banditry, piracy is like a major thing in the Kyoshi era. And she doesn't like the brutal Dao Fei groups, but she has a bit of a soft spot for the more noble style ones. And so these are groups that ultimately hate the actual kind of noble kind of ruling class of the world. And she kind of agrees with that because we know she doesn't like the world leaders. So there's already that kind of instability there. Like I said before, the 46th Earth King was not liked by the people at all. Not to mention just the whole idea of like what's one of the big things about Jonju, and I think this was in the the stream last night going over the Kyoshi content, that important line from Jonju of like, who actually keeps order in the Earth Kingdom? It's me. And then he dies, and so it gets even worse. And this is still like this all happens in around when Kyoshi's about 40, I think, is where the estimates usually are. So it's not like super far into her reign as the Avatar, so you sort of get that there's like a lot of stuff happening that could cause it to happen, but still it's a rather extreme situation. Now, admittedly, it is a situation that happens like again, in that Kuvira effectively does a Chin the Conqueror-esque thing in Korra's era. Obviously, it's different there because she sort of retakes it under like the idea that I'm a good character, and then, does the kind of heel turn afterwards. Whereas this is more the idea of, like, what? Did Kyoshi initially, deep down, know he was always a tyrant? Or did he, like, become a tyrant? Did he go from being someone who was great to being a tyrant over the course of his campaign? This is why, like, there's obviously room to, like, heavily expand this story with a lot of details that I think would be quite interesting to actually get overall, but still hugely impressive moment here, seeing an Avatar in their prime just do all this stuff. Even just the whole idea of like, oh yeah, Avatar state is literally kind of landscape altering. You can create an island with it, so that's super impressive. So yeah, from here what happens is that obviously everyone's like, that's cool and all, but you just confessed. You are guilty. You just said it. So the wheel of punishment is rolled out, and they spin it. Aang gets boiled in oil. But just before they can go through with it, the rough rhinos attack again. And immediately the mayor is just like, oh, you're not going to help us. I'll switch it to community service. Help us by taking out the rough rhinos, and so Aang jumps into action in some of the Kyoshi gear, and we basically get Aang versus Colonel Monkey as Katara and Sokka deal with the rest of the rough rhinos. Very cool sequence here, where there's a lot of clever moves to take out the other members, including Sokka, like using a lot of his equipment carefully, which is cool. That the equipment isn't just a random thing for jokes. It actually is like, hey, I'll put out the fire on your arrow with this. I'll set a one of your like dynamite sticks off with my magnifying extending thing, and then the explosion reveals that, like, oh hey, they actually picked up my boomerang and now I have it back. And then the kind of more main fight is Aang versus Monkey, which is a cool standoff in an alleyway, which Aang eventually wins with a really cool airbending drop kick that just takes Monkey out. So very, very cool action sequence. Kind of one of those underrated ones where it's actually kind of cool to see a lot of moving parts going on. But what are your thoughts on the Wheel of Punishment and the action scene here?
I agree. It definitely was one of the more, for an episode that is generally regulated to sort of more of a filler type feel, it definitely does have, a pretty good conclusion sort of fight scene here with the different characters and using their sort of abilities. And, they're not all sort of like, super good with their sort of techniques compared to sort of like where they end up by like the end of the show or anything like that. But for this being, in book 2 and them just sort of having, some training, but not, sort of the experience that they have later on, this was pretty well done. Like they work pretty well in concert with each other and are able to use sort of the abilities and the sort of props that they have on hand in sort of the most sort of effective way here. And yeah, I think, just the fact that he's able to sort of, change the wheel, to whatever he wants to be in the moment just sort of shows how sort of, flimsy their sort of justice system is in this sort of village here. And just sort of the whole idea is sort of, it just sort of makes sort of fun of the idea of Chin a Conqueror. So I guess, it makes it at least a little bit more palatable considering, what he actually did in the past and everything like that. So, the way that they do it for this show, how they balance it out being a kid's show and everything like that, I think, it works out pretty well.
Mm-hmm. And the ending here is that the town changes Avatar Day to now celebrate Aang saving the village rather than Kyoshi killing Chin. And they will now serve a special festival food, which is unfried dough to celebrate, Aang not being boiled in oil. And it's just a joke ending, that awful food item, and they just hate the town in general, and they want to get out of here as soon as possible. So I think nice funny ending here of just like, we never want to come back here. But I would actually really like to go back to Chin Village just to see how it's changed, like in the aftermath of the war, how their perceptions on Chin might have changed in all of this, and has them now celebrating Aang done anything more to the village? Do they have a different system when it comes to justice? Is it more fair? Is there a new mayor? Maybe that's a big thing. But what are your thoughts on the ending and the prospect of, would you like to come back here in like future content?
Would I like to return back? I don't know. I mean, it'd be curious to see, if they still have the same sort of ideas, or if they're sort of like, what era are we coming back here to see, what they're doing? Like, would it be like during the movies or something like that? Or would it be like during chorus time to see what's happening or what they've changed or anything like that? Like, how do they function in their future and things like that? But I don't know. I think the end of the episode is funny. I think, you can see how they're not sort of into the whole, idea of what their sort of pastry is. I think they were more excited when they were sort of trying to sort of end the Avatar rather than, sort of survive him and everything like that. But, it's a fun bit to the end of the episode.
Mm-hmm. And with that, we will move into our Korra episode for this podcast, and that is K209, The Guide. So we finished Beginnings last time, and now we're into The Guide, getting towards the end of Korra Book 2. So, interesting note about this episode, obviously, it is the, if I remember correctly, this is the last episode that is not animated by Studio Mir. So this is the last Studio Pierrot episode. So that's just an interesting little note. We're with our main studio in the episodes after this straight away. But yeah, I really like this episode. As I said in all these reviews for book two, I've always been a big fan of Korra book two, and I really, the more and more I go back, really don't get the fandom's like general hatred towards the book. Maybe certain specific elements, but as a whole, I just get very confused about like this is all really good, and this episode in particular I think is really strong. Janora comes into the spotlight here. We get Korra Tenzin content that's good for Korra. There's good development for Tenzin and all of this. Kaya gets a bit of a chance to shine. There's advancements in a lot of the other plots, like Mako, kind of his plot getting advanced with Varric and the others. And even the Unalaq stuff is really good, setting up the kind of finale kind of sequence of episodes that they get into like pretty quickly immediately after this. So I love this whole idea, and especially like the real introduction here of the idea of like, oh yeah, the guide and the concept of like typically an avatar does have a spiritual person to help guide them into the spirit world, and that concept really coming up here for the first time is actually like really, really cool to me. But what are your thoughts overall on the guide?
Yeah, no, I don't think, there's anything too bad about this episode. I mean, I do get the idea of, people don't like this season overall. And I don't know, a lot of that I think is just because the other seasons just have a lot more sort of hype to them than this one. Like this one, even though there's still like a huge battle at the end of it with like two huge beings and stuff like that, as well as, a whole bunch of stuff that we learned about the history, I guess, and maybe the scheme of people's ratings, that just feels like that's not as much action compared to the other ones. So that's normally how I take that. But the episode itself, I think, is fine. This one definitely sort of, it does a lot of stuff based off of what sort of happened in the past, as well as catches up a lot of characters that haven't been sort of like in the know. So it is sort of like a recap of some things, but it also, at the same time is moving things forward. Like it doesn't really hold back in that sort of regard here. So we're still learning new things. We're still figuring out things, now we actually understand, the guide for who Korra actually has, as opposed to who we might have thought it would have been. So no, there's definitely a lot of progress in this episode, even if it isn't maybe sort of the most sort of bombastic one compared to a lot of other things.
Mm-hmm. So we'll start here with the Mako plot. That's, I think, the kind of smallest one here, but still some interesting stuff here, where obviously it's the kind of Bolin, Mako, Asami plot here that begins to split apart here because of what happens right at the end. But Mako, of course, has his suspicions about, okay, Varric is behind this, I just need to prove it. But because Bolin has a good relationship with Varric, he made him a mover star, and because Varric saved Asami's company, they all doubt Mako but he's been good to me. Why would you suspect him of doing all of this stuff? And it is hard to believe, but like you feel for Mako, like that you can tell his friends don't want to be like super dismissive of him, but they really don't believe it. But we do get some of these scenes again with kind of, this is where Bolin finds out that Mako and Asami are back together, which this is definitely, I would say, like probably the weakest plot point in all of book two. Is just that I get so little out of this reunion of this relationship between Mako and Asami, because they don't really focus on them as a couple, and it just feels like we didn't really know exactly what to do, so let's put them together, even though I think this whole plot would have worked perfectly fine, taking romance out of it, just that they're friends. Like, nothing in this, to me, hinges on the romance kind of really being anything, except sort of just to create little drama moments. But otherwise, like, I think there's a lot going on here that's pretty good. Like, after this, like, Varric drags him into a meeting, and this is the threat of Varric. He still says some jokey things, but he basically is like, join me, like, I can tell you're intelligent, join me, put your mind to work on my security force, otherwise, who knows, we might not be able to protect Asami and Bolin from something that might happen. But Mako does refuse because he's a police officer, he wants to take down Varric, even if he doesn't have the tools right now to actually do it. So there's another scene, and we'll get to it in a second, but what are your thoughts on the kind of opening section, Bolin, Mako, and Asami here?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I like the idea that Mako is sort of, he's doing this sort of on his own. He's sort of out of the normal system of things, but he doesn't quite sort of, he still doesn't have the resources that he needs to do this. But this is Mako, and this is sort of his, for better or worse, his sort of like strength of character in terms of having his sort of honor in doing these sort of things, right? And he's pretty much figured it out, right? But he's just only one person, and he doesn't really have anyone sort of in his corner, and everything's sort of going sort of against him. Which, some of it, you could say is his own sort of doing, the fact that he's sort of, is sort of on the ends with, his brother at the current time here. And, him and Asami, like, I think it definitely could have worked with them just sort of being friends and just sort of, helping them out in this sort of situation. It definitely does feel sometimes like there's untold sort of drama here just for the fact of drama, which, I guess if you're trying to make Bolin sort of more invested, then maybe it works in that regards. But I think, it still would have worked, I think, regardless of that sort of situation here. But yeah, definitely, you're definitely understanding more and more as the episode goes on that Varric has, other things in play and something's going to happen.
One interesting thing in the opening scene of this plot is this moment where Bolin is on set, and then the crew just kind of leaves him up there, like hanging upside down, and it's like he's meant to be the star, but like he gets forgotten until like his friends come in, and I'm just kind of thinking like, what are they kind of going for there? Because like the way the arc actually goes, it's that like Bolin shows himself to be a star, like on screen and off, and kind of he helps to kind of prove Mako is correct in a couple of episodes' time. I think what they're going for here is just to kind of highlight that he needs to keep his friends kind of with him and not just like focus on the movers industry, because in a way like the industry doesn't overly care about him. Once he's popular, they care to a certain degree, but like they're just willing to leave him up there and go on their breaks, that sort of a thing. But what were your thoughts on that little moment, or just the kind of abandonment of Bolin there until like Asami came in? Do you think it's more of just a gag thing, or do you think it's meant to kind of tie into his kind of arc in the book?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, I don't know. With Bolin's character, he always has sort of like the gag nature, like, sort of like Sokka, right? Like he's sort of just the one that they're, more or less, if they're going to make a joke about someone and they're going to be like the funny guy, then that's who they're going to sort of do it with. So, it works in that regard, but it does feel kind of odd in terms of, like you're saying, like he's a star and they're just sort of letting him go there. So I don't know. It does always sort of feel a little bit sort of awkward as far as just being sort of a setup for setup sort of sakes there. But I mean, it definitely does, they do get the point that he definitely does need his friends, and he is sort of, he's sort of a character that is better with other people around him rather than just sort of being on his own, which in the movers, he's a star and he's on his own, but, also the whole idea of the movers is sort of like a new thing as well. Like, I think at this point they know it's a thing and that it'll be, popular or whatever, but, I guess the idea of stardom and fandom and that sort of idea, at least in terms of like the cast and crew, isn't quite there at that sort of level yet. And with Bolin's sort of character, just sort of, people aren't sort of just naturally gravitating towards him just like that by itself. So yeah, there's sort of a combination of things there in terms of his, sort of growth of character that they're still sort of playing around with.
Yeah, and I think there's an element of like Varric is at this point sort of just using Bolin for his popularity, that he pays him and stuff like that, he's friendly with him, but their proper dynamic where they actually truly become kind of friends, close, is something that happens like after this, basically.
Yeah.
So I think there's that element as well, like going back to the fact that Bolin and Asami both have positive views on Varric because they kind of owe him. And that's where he's kind of like weaseled his way into this position, even though we all know he's actually behind it. And yeah, we get the kind of final scene here. Mako has denied working for Varric, and Varric basically gets one over on Mako here. Mako gets arrested in his apartment. Lu, Gon, and Lin come in and they're like, hey, the triads that you hired told us that you helped them to steal the stuff, that you were working with them. Like, you used to be a triad, you're back to doing that again. They find cash and explosives, which were obviously planted, but he can't prove they weren't at this point. So he's dragged off to jail, and he has to. All he can say is that like Varric is behind it, but because he's the only one who knows that, he looks crazy, and we even get a little bit of like Asami's a bit conflicted because she doesn't really know what the situation is here. And this is very much the, okay, Mako's in an awful position now that like he's put himself out there and has got. How will he get out of this situation? And it's really cool the way it reverses itself in episode 11, I think. But for now, it's like, oh, Mako has had a rough run of things recently, and you think like he can't really come back from this. So, pretty notable scene, the kind of fall of Mako here. But what are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, no, he definitely gets sort of outplayed in this sort of moment here, right? Like he's just been expertly set up to sort of be the fall guy in this sort of situation without really knowing anything that was, sort of amiss here. I don't know. I think it's definitely a learning moment for Mako in this case, right? Like he'll probably never sort of come at something from this sort of angle because he definitely seems to learn from most of his mistakes eventually. But yeah, it definitely, feels like he's on his own here, and the people that, should trust him the most don't quite see eye to eye with things going on. And, it definitely feels like the other cops are definitely just sort of, even though they're probably way more corrupt than Mako's ever even thought of being, they get the one up on him.
Yeah, and it's just to add to that, it's the idea that, like, he, a fellow detective, can give them, like, proper information, and they'll just ignore him. But they'll trust the word of, like, criminals to go after Mako. Just highlighting that kind of, I suppose, culture within the police force at this point of like, oh, the rookie's kind of saying something. And obviously this is why like it gets reversed so heavily, where like Lu and Gon get fired, Mako basically gets a promotion after this. It's pretty satisfying when we eventually resolve. But that's that plot for this episode. We'll cover the Unalaq one, which also only has a couple of scenes. So this is Unalaq, Eska, and Desna. So they basically report back that, as far as they're aware, they basically saw Korra die and basically be killed by this spirit. They're convinced that she's gone, and Unalaq now has to kind of go ahead with his plan without the person who can open the spirit portals. But he seems somewhat confident that he can still do it, and so he's like, you two come with me, we're going into the spirit portal, we're going to like force the portal open. And so that's what happens here. They get in, they head over to the portal barrier, and Unalaq starts to do this really powerful stream of water techniques where he keeps like pumping water at this portal. Eska and Desna do the same, so it's three really powerful water benders just like going at this portal. But the barrier doesn't break. Instead, it kind of like, it backfires like spirit energy at them. Desna gets hit and is pretty badly injured here. And Eska is very worried about her brother and actually leaves to get him help. But Unalaq just continues going at the portal, switching to doing a kind of like ice stagger thing, some really crazy stuff he does with waterbending here to try and force the portal open. Doesn't care at all that his son has just been injured. But it's at this moment he realizes that, oh, Korra is the only way to do this, and it's this kind of failure. And I actually think this is a really cool moment for Unalaq, who's been in relative control up to now, to just give him this moment of like, as far as he is aware, this is a complete failure. He cannot continue his plan because the person he needs to open the portal is dead, and the next Avatar is not coming around for quite a while. So he feels it's just an awful situation here for him and his plan. But we'll cover the final scene with him in just a second. But what are your thoughts on this kind of sequence here for Unalaq? Trying to kind of play off the loss of Korra as being nothing, but it actually being everything.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess it's sort of like your villain sort of mindset, right? Like, there got to be another way. There's, a way that I've, figured out how to do this, and of course he's using his kids as sort of the means of, making this sort of a success here, right? But no, he doesn't quite have a full grasp of the situation here. Although by the end of things, he does, sort of get away and figure out a way around everything, right? But it sort of goes back to what he originally wanted to do anyway, right? So it's just sort of lucky that the situation sort of, provided a good situation or a good, way out for his sort of, mistakes or, what he considers mistakes and having his kids try to capture Korra in sort of the first place here. But yeah, definitely, he's trying to get through it. I don't know. I think it was interesting to see how, he thought he might sort of brute force his way through the spirit portal, which I don't know. That seems, an interesting idea considering he knows sort of like spiritual techniques and sort of the ways of how things would normally work in sort of like the best case scenario. So it definitely feels like this is sort of like I guess a desperation measure that he's willing to go to at this point, which I guess he's a power hungry sort of villain type character. So I guess they all have that sort of point where they reach that sort of threshold, I guess here. But yeah, his techniques definitely seem pretty brutal in terms of trying to get through it, which of course don't work in the end.
And then it is also important for the kind of relationship between like son and daughter and father, because they've been exceptionally loyal to him the entire time. They'll do anything he asks. And this is the first
Hmm.
time we really start to see like really, really heavy doubts here of like, I just got zapped by spirit energy and I'm in a bad way. You didn't even blink. You didn't even turn around. You were like, hey, Eska, continue bending. But she actually is the one to care for Desna, even though she maybe in her core personality comes across as maybe even maybe, like less caring than anyone. But no, she actually stops to care for her brother, and it's obviously the setup for the almost surprise reaction in like the final episode where Korra is like, oh, I'm sorry about what happened to your father, but they have come to realize that like he was terrible. Like basically he had lost his humanity, and we kind of realized that along the way, and this is kind of part of that. Like he just doesn't care about his family. His focus is entirely on spiritual affairs, as we see here. But the final scene with Unalaq here is very interesting. He actually goes over to Vatu because he's in the spirit world, so he goes straight over to the Tree of Time and is like, "I failed. I don't think the plan can work." Basically, but Vatu is kind of like, "You're not quite right there. Korra is alive," and it's like, "Wait, how do you know?" And he's like, "I'm connected to Rava, and I can tell that like Rava is still alive in the avatar that we've had this whole time." And actually, you're completely back in play because Korra has just entered the spirit world, so you know what you need to do. So it's the setup here of like he goes from being complete failure to all of a sudden they've entered my world effectively, because it's basically like inexperienced Korra in the spirit world against spirit expert Unalaq. He's suddenly completely back in play. So nice scene to end it there to set up the kind of intense final few episodes of the season. But what are your thoughts on this? Getting, I suppose, yeah, this is our first like present day Vatu scene, really.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, so to see him in his sort of trapped form, I think is pretty, interesting to see because we've seen how he got in there,
Mm.
right? But now we get to see that he's still there, he's still locked up, he's not obviously going anywhere, but they're working on a way of getting him out. And it seems like there actually is a way, considering, they thought he was sort of, they failed in sort of getting him out initially. And I don't even think, I sort of noticed at first when they made the idea that, they're in the spirit world with their bending, but we just saw Korra and Janora go in and they don't have that. So there's, that whole sort of aspect that you're thinking about now, or at least now I'm thinking about having, already seen the whole seasons and everything like that. So it's, it's a nice sort of setup for things that are going to be happening in the next episodes.
Hmm. Um, but yeah, then we go into the main section of the episode where our main characters are effectively Korra, Tenzin, Jinora, and Kaya, basically, as well. So we open up with an interesting scene. We're at the Eastern Air Temple. Jinora is playing with spirits, but we get the reveal that they are hiding from everyone else except her. And she is basically hiding the fact that she can see the spirits from everyone else. But if you've been keeping track of Janora's arc, you know that she has had a couple of other kind of big spirit moments in the book, and this is just another one of them. And so it's a really nice setup as this just slowly plays out in the background, this little arc of Janora sees the spirits. No one seems to ask too many questions until Kaya begins to have her suspicions, and then all of a sudden it's like the guide is not Tenzin, it's Jinora. It's all interlinked here, but just I suppose the early stuff with Jinora. What are your thoughts about like this as like really being the episode where she properly comes into play as being like she kind of properly joins the main cast as of like this episode more or less?
Yeah, I think that's cool. I mean, I don't know. I wonder if I really sort of expected her to play such a large role, coming into things. I don't know. I don't know if I thought that, but I think the way that they went about it, from her sort of being, sort of shy about things and sort of, holding back to really sort of, coming into play. And not that she's like super sort of out there by the end of the episode, especially considering, how she is in sort of later seasons as well. No, I think it's a good progression for her to sort of show, her techniques, her abilities, and how, that sort of helps, sort of the family sort of in general, especially sort of like Tenzin and everything that sort of he has to sort of come to terms and to grapple with this episode, as well as just going forward. It's interesting to see sort of, how, some people can sort of be sort of humbled by things that have, sort of held them back in the past to where they are now, sort of in the present and going forward in the future as well. So I don't know. I like the fact that she had this place, and it's always cool to see the younger characters have such a important role in the show, right? Like that's sort of the whole sort of key element of the original sort of season here. And even though most of our main characters are a bit sort of older, it's nice to sort of see that sort of ideas sort of come back and play. Granted, Jinora is probably one of the most, mature of, sort of the younger characters that we've seen throughout the show, and maybe more mature than some of our older ones as well. But it's nice to get to see that.
Yeah, and it's just important this element being added into like Tenzin's arc here, that like this episode is really all about like referencing the earlier episodes of like Korra and Tenzin parted on very bad terms, like their like mentor kind of student relationship being completely broken. Here's the return, but how are we actually going to resolve this? And like, is it just an apology situation now that he's here to actually help her? Can he be the teacher that she needs at this point? And this is why Jinora is so important, because you get the reveal that Tenzin actually can't be the spiritual teacher that she needs. And so Tenzin has to admit to everyone, including Korra, that like, oh yeah, I was kind of lying to myself and you about like being this perfect teacher for you, when it's my daughter who's actually going to have to help you take this next step, and that Unalaq did play a role in your development as well. So that's the other important kind of part here is Tenzin can't do it all on his own, get into here. But the big moment here is obviously Korra arrives at the Eastern Air Temple. Big celebration moment. She's reunited with the rest of the cast. She remembered the Tenzin's itinerary, so this is why she knew to show up at this temple on this day to find them there. Cool little moment there. To show that she listens, I suppose. She didn't just ignore all that. There's a funny moment where she is forced to like reveal the entire plot of book 2 to them, because they've been completely out of the loop since they left at the start of the season. That was a very fun moment, just how crazy everything's been. But the core of it is that she needs to enter the spirit world to close the portal that she opened. Otherwise, harmonic convergence is going to hit, Vatu is going to be released. That's what we need to avert from happening. And yeah, Unalaq is a bad guy. That's another reveal as well. So yeah, Tenzin feels this is his moment to shine. He will step up, be the mentor that she needs, and he will guide Korra into the spirit world. He basically almost kind of gets across the idea, even more so than the airbending training that he was always going to do with her. This is what he's been waiting for, is to be the spiritual mentor to her. So what are your thoughts on Korra's return here and the kind of early interaction makes her big return?
Yeah, no, I like those sort of initial, sort of reactions here. The idea of, what sort of happened, the sort of quick sort of catch up. It feels, it's like, no one's, sort of like, even though Tenzin's like, oh, I knew this would happen, like, this is still pretty much a shock to everyone what's actually going on here. This sort of, I don't know, it's nice to see sort of that sort of initial sort of reaction to what sort of happened, that they've been sort of like on sort of the, off the grid of things actually happening. So I thought that was a cool way to sort of catch them up, and they did it pretty quick, so it doesn't feel like it's too sort of bad or intrusive or annoying that they're sort of doing with this. Is sort of just quick and done.
Then we get a couple of scenes. We get basically a little bit of a montage here through various attempts to meditate into the spirit world, with Korra and Tenzin being the duo. And the main thing you take away from this is Tenzin is like more frustrated about this than Korra is. That he has put so much pressure on himself that every little thing that's not perfect is a major problem. So he's giving out to Milo for ring the bell wrong. Kaya has put out too much incense. All of these problems, and everyone's kind of building up to like, what's going on with Tenzin here? This is not what he's usually like. We're building up to something. Korra eventually asks, like, what's going on with you? And we get the reveal, Tenzin has never been to the spirit world. And this shocks everyone, and I like that they took the time to do this, including Pema coming in and being like, wait, what? Like, you were like meditating for days at a time, like, you never actually went anywhere? What's going on here? And I think it's Kaya who asked the question, and it's like, so wait, how were you going to help Korra be in spiritual matters if you yourself basically are not spiritual? And he reveals this is his greatest failing as like a teacher, airbender, son of Aang, everything. Like he really beats himself up over the idea that this is something he can't succeed at. And so this is a major reveal that answers a couple of questions about like early book 2 as well. But what are your thoughts on this whole sequence here, these frustrating moments, and then the Korra Tenzin conversation with this reveal that he's not spiritual?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely sort of unfortunate for sort of Tenzin and his sort of character and everything like that. But I think, it's a good moment with him just sort of being able to sort of, admit this one thing that he's sort of not sort of perfect at, which, there are some jokes thrown at it, especially from sort of his siblings and, even his wife at the moment, like you just mentioned about, this seems like something he would be able to do. But, I think it just goes to show you that, not all aspects of, air nomad sort of culture are able to be done by everyone that's actually, sort of part of it. There are, different techniques, different things, different abilities that some can do and others can't do. And, when you sort of think about Tenzin's sort of, temperament, how he can sort of be quick to some moments of things, it's almost not too sort of surprising that he isn't able to sort of just sort of naturally, sort of flow into that sort of state of mind that you can sort of, go into this other sort of plane. There's also, other things that go along with sort of being able to do this particular technique. And you get to see how, this technique is actually done with someone who has that sort of, natural sort of ability here to actually help Korra in this sort of instance.
Mm-hmm. And this scene is important, like looking back to early book 2 and the whole idea of like Tenzin being like, no, don't go to train with Unalaq. I'm your spiritual teacher. And this reveal is actually like huge. Of like, we saw a little bit of this in the first episode of like, Tenzin was not able to calm down the dark spirit. Unalaq was, and the idea is like, yeah, what were you going to do? Like, you were basically saying, Korra, you're making the wrong choice, but she went with the person who actually had the the skills required to do this. And we'll address this more when they do the more kind of resolution of this a little bit later on. But it's a key moment because, again, like, Korra in early book 2 gets heavily criticized, but I think a lot of people, especially with book 2, I get like, are really not super familiar with a lot of the scenes and a lot of the content and how they link together. I do think it's kind of under analyzed, some of this stuff. But what happens after this is that this is where Kaya points out that, Jinora, you step up here. You know something. You're spiritual. This is your chance to kind of take the spotlight. And she reveals that, okay, spirits come out. They do. And so everyone is super surprised that there were spirits around them the whole time. But that, like, hey, how long has this been the case, Jinora? And she doesn't exactly know, but she kind of roughly says that she feels she's always had it, but has maybe only recently come to kind of realize that, oh, this is actually like a unique thing about me, that I'm spiritual and can see spirits. But it's actually been a thing that's been happening kind of constantly throughout her life, but she's just never talked about it because she didn't get what it was about. So, very cool moment here, as like, this is where like Jinora properly joins the episode, as like she's gonna have to be involved in this overall. Very, very cool moment that we get here. Tenzin is annoyed after this, but not specifically at Jinora, and more just his own failings, more so than anything, and Kaya reassures her about this. We also see the start of the whole idea that Bumi is actually quite spiritually inclined himself. The fact that he forms a friendship immediately with Boomju, the spirit, that actually becomes something that gets like confirmed later on, is that he is also kind of spiritually inclined himself. But so what are your thoughts on some of these kind of moments here, where we're actually getting like a little bit with Bumi, a little bit with Kaya, and of course Jinora in the spotlight?
Yeah, I think this is a nice sort of way to get across sort of, Jinora's ability and able to sort of bring her more to the forefront. I think it's cool that her aunt was the one to sort of, initially sort of just sort of notice this. I don't know if that's because, Kaya has some, sort of untapped spiritual sense as well, or she's just, observant of, what's going on when Tenzin's just so Tenzin's just so sort of focused on the spirits, but not actually, being able to connect with them. But no, I think it was, it's a good progression to sort of show, the spirits are around them, this whole time. Of course, the other, Tenzin's kids are all about sort of the spirits and everything. So it's cool to see them interact with them, just, based on just, them sort of being there, not even more so in terms of like, they have their own sort of spiritual ability as well. Just the fact that they're cool and they're cute sort of creatures is enough for them, especially sort of Milo. So I like that sort of aspect there. But yeah, definitely, Tenzin is definitely sort of being sort of, humbled in this moment here. He's definitely, having to sort of relook at things. And I guess it is interesting to see that Bumi is sort of, so sort of, I guess, untapped sort of spiritual potential here, which, I don't know, I guess with his character just being sort of so fun and easygoing, that almost sort of kind of makes sense, even though, we know he was sort of in the army and the forces and has done all these sort of crazy things, but he's also just sort of a random sort of wild guy as well. So I guess that kind of fits in play with his character.
Mm-hmm. Then we get an interesting Korra Jinora situation here, where like Korra's impressed at Jinora's like talent, being able to talk to the spirit. She's just like, you're so lucky that this is the case. But Jinora immediately is like, oh no, you're the lucky one, because you got to like experience the story. You got to meet the first Avatar, experience what his full story was. That's what kind of interests me more than anything. And Jinora kind of Korra recaps that a little bit. And it's at this moment they realize that like, oh wait, a lot of what we kind of went through together is sort of connected. That the moment Jinora had her big connection with the statue back in episode 2 was the same moment that Korra opened the spirit portal. And this is where there's that realization of like, if there is a spirit guide connection, then in a way this is what confirms that these two are the ones that are going to work well together in this situation. So cool little moment there. I like kind of Korra just being so like, it's cool that Jinora is spiritual. I'm perfectly fine learning from you just as much as anyone. But what are your thoughts on this scene?
Yeah, no, that was a really cool connection moment, especially when you saw sort of the idea of that sort of happening, but you didn't really quite, sort of grasp the full sort of meaning of it. So sort of get that explained from both of their perspectives in real time, and to realize that it's definitely one of those key moments where they understand, I guess sort of how well they could work together. Just, Janora's, ability to connect with the spirits, and, Korra, of course, being part spirit in a way anyway. So no, I like that they have that sort of connection there, and that's just something that you can see get developed more and more through this episode and just overall through the show. So that was definitely a great spark of a beginning of that sort of relationship that they have with each other.
Mm-hmm. And that brings us to the kind of like big moment. Junor guides them to the area that actually is going to be the most spiritual, which is further down the mountain. They find an abandoned meditation circle that they need to cleanse. And this is where like Tenzin does actually get to shine a little bit. He's not spiritual, but because he's like studied spiritual stuff so much, he knows all those details. So he does realize that like, okay, we do have to perform a cleansing ceremony here. Aang did teach me this. So what happens is he does the airbending kind of cleansing ceremony with the incense. This actually draws out dark spirit bats that were kind of hiding underneath the circle. And they're initially kind of fending them off, thinking, oh, do we have to fight them here? But this is where Korra steps up and realizes that this is her moment, that she has to prove herself as having this spiritual potential. So she finally spirit bends properly for the first time, doing the full technique, the kind of water kind of cyclone around all of the dark spirit bats, and then the light comes on, and she actually does let them kind of go in peace. She properly transforms them into light, and it's this huge moment here. But more than that, they add on to this the kind of, in a way, resolution, at least initial resolution to Korra and Tenzin, which is the whole idea of like Tenzin noting that like, oh, like you actually learned a really notable skill from Unalaq that's really valuable to have that skill to be able to transform dark spirits like that. Noting that like she did benefit from learning with Unalaq, but she reverses it, and this is where she says sorry to him for the way she kind of treated him in the earlier episodes, and that yes, she learned this from Unalaq, but Tenzin is the one who is the true like mentor to her, who actually cares about her, whereas Unalaq only cared that she was the Avatar. And Tenzin, responds and is just like, I will not let you down. So this is also, I think, important in terms of like, I think this is a really good resolution, because it's both characters kind of realizing that like, yes, Tenzin was actually holding Korra back in the earlier episodes. Korra did need to spend time with Unalaq to take that first step forward spiritually, but that the mentor she actually needs is the one who cares about her. I think that's a really well done kind of arc here. And even the kind of more action part of this, the fact that Tenzin gets to do the cleansing ceremony, but then Korra spirit bends, I think is a cool moment for them both as well. So overall, I really like this scene. But what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, no, I think it's great that they get to see, they get a better understanding of sort of what their relationship is with each other, and sort of, what Korra had to learn, and sort of her initial sort of, I guess, sort of, breakthrough to her spiritualness, or at least being sort of like open to the idea of it. Because I mean, even the technique that she uses to sort of, calm the sort of, spirit bats or whatever, she messed up on that a couple times too. So it's not like she's, she was perfect to begin with any of that sort of stuff there. So I think without this sort of, push from a mentor that at least had her sort of best interests in mind to begin with, she probably wouldn't have got necessarily to where she is, overall. It's just that she's always a more action, oriented person. So, she wants to learn sort of techniques and stuff, but being able to sort of like understand the sort of deeper meaning, or even to realize that there is a deeper meaning to some of these things, is, it takes someone with at least a little bit more patience and understanding, and, with her best interest in mind, like you said. So yeah, I think this was definitely, it's a cool, set up scene piece to sort of reveal the spinal sort of like cleansing area of this sort of spiritual location that they're going to use here.
And then the kind of final sequence is that like Tenzin is still kind of holding out hope that he can be the guide, but like Kaya and Jinora have to cut in and be like, it's not going to be you. You kind of need to accept this. It is Jinora who does have to be the one. And Tenzin does reluctantly agree once kind of Jinora kind of steps up and kind of says her piece that like, I think I can do this. I think this is what I need to do. And he agrees and is proud of her. And so, yeah, we get Korra and Jinora meditating in the same way that Korra and Tenzin did earlier on. But this time it works. You see Korra open her eyes, you see the glow, and then the really cool fade from the physical world into the spirit world as their spirits cross over. And they are in the kind of beautiful light area of the spirit world. So it's a really cool setup for the next episode, which is hugely spirit world focus. And that's where this section of it ends with like success. Jinora is Korra's spirit guide, and they are in the spirit world. So so far so good, but we'll see what happens. But what are your thoughts on this final scene?
Yeah, no, I like this. I think it's great to see, sort of the realization of the situation at hand and how, they have to get things going, which is something that they've said throughout the whole episode, right? Like there's a time frame on what's going on. Like if we don't get this, bad things are going to happen. So, being able to admit that, being able to push through it, and, seeing the both of them sort of finally cross over into the spirit world, and we get to see sort of like, this ideal looking place for a couple moments before we get, sort of the fade out of the episode. I think it's a nice way to sort of end the episode with things, feeling like they have the hope of positivity in the future, even though things are still, pretty dire overall.
Mm-hmm. And then I suppose the last thing we should probably discuss here is just that, like I said at the start, this is the last Studio Pierrot animated episode. I suppose just like in this episode in particular, but then just like overall, what are your thoughts on that? Because I think a lot of people make a lot out of the fact that like half of this season is animated by them, and they make it this like big point that it's not the same quality and stuff like that. But now that we're kind of this far into the book and we're through all the Studio Pierrot episodes, how do you think they did as the sort of kind of like fill-in animation studio?
I don't know. I mean, I think for the most part, unless there's something really, really, key or anything like that, then it works perfectly fine. I mean, the storytelling itself is still the same. So I don't know. I think it's a combination of a new story and people just not liking, for whatever reason, this storyline that they have going on in this sort of, season that is sort of, combined together, making it, sort of a more harsher critique on it than it otherwise would be. Because, if you pull frames from any sort of, season show by any sort of, production company, you'll find ones that look sort of wonky. I think it's just something that people pull more from this season just because, maybe they don't particularly like it. But I don't know, for this episode, there wasn't anything that sort of bothered me. I mean, granted, it's not as an action heavy episode as some of the other ones. So, you can take that with whatever grain of salt that you want to. But, for overall, I think, it worked for me. I mean, I like the fact that they were even able to find a studio to sort of get it, because, it could have been a lot longer sort of production if they had to sort of wait for Studio Mer to sort of come back and everything like that. So I don't know. I think for me, it worked out in the end and it keeps things going. It's not such a huge drastic change that, it feels like it's something completely different. Like it's not like they changed the art style like 100%, but I don't know. I think especially when you look at the episodes on their own or in sort of their sequence of events, it feels, more or less fine or anything like that. So I don't know. It worked for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I do think it's one of those things where like it was a very kind of public in a way piece of news when it came out that Studio Mir wouldn't be doing all the episodes, and there was a whole saga in a way about it as it kind of came out. Whereas I do kind of get the impression that like a lot of people just don't know that ATLA has 3 different animation studios. Like it just never gets brought up in the same way, even though I'd arguably say like it's more noticeable when you see the sort of secondary animation studio in the seasons of Avatar. You can, I think, more obviously tell the difference. So I've always felt like it's kind of a weird thing to pick on the book for, when this is like pretty high quality work overall from Studio Pierrot on Korra Book 2, because even in this episode there's some, I think, nicely animated scenes, like the whole spirit bat sequence, the spirit bending sequence is always very cool. They as an animation studio got to do a lot of those spirit bending moments. That's really cool. Unalaq's water bending streaming with Eska and Desna, very cool looking. Yes, like you would say in this episode in particular, just because of what the plot is, there's a lot more just kind of talking scenes where the characters are just in the background. There's not too much going on, but sometimes that's just the way episodes go. So I never really had an issue, but I'm also never really one to kind of overly pick apart the animation by like doing the kind of frame by frame kind of type thing, because that's just, you'll see flaws in anything if you do that. Like there's Studio Mir stuff where like characters have 6 fingers in certain scenes, but no one really focuses on that too. I think it's fine. Like I think Studio Mir obviously on Korra is the better studio, but like I don't think it's a massive kind of thing where it's like hugely noticeable. But our next batch of episodes for the next podcast is going to be where am I here? Yes. So it'll be 2 episodes again. So we're going to be doing for Avatar 206, and that is the Blind Bandit. So the introduction properly of Toph here. And then for Korra, K210, so the following episode, which is A New Spiritual Age. So I would say those are 2 very well regarded episodes. I think, like, obviously for Korra, Beginnings is well regarded. And then I think beyond that, I'd say people always appreciate episode 10 because Iroh's in it. And then The Blind Bandit is like a classic episode of Avatar. So both those are going to be very exciting to discuss. But any quick thoughts on the selection for next time out?
Yeah, no, I agree. Those are more, I guess, sort of popular type of episodes for sure.
So that has been the podcast. I'm not sure just yet if this will be maybe the last one for the year. If there's going to be any more news that maybe will prompt us to do like one final podcast for the year. So there may or may not be another episode. It really depends on like if there is any other news. Because things get busy coming up to Christmas, end of the year. I'm doing like end of year videos and stuff like that. So we'll see what happens. Either way, we'll be back at the very least in January with the next episode, where we'll hopefully be doing those ones, maybe talking about the next Netflix Avatar trailer, maybe some Avatar Studios news, who knows. But otherwise, that has been episode 266 of the Avatar Online podcast. It's been myself and Greg. Thanks for listening, and bye.
Bye-bye.